Hello everyone and welcome to this special interview with Mr. Franklin Lamb, a former Assistant Counsel of the House Judiciary Committee of the U.S. Congress and a professor in international law and an American writer. First of all, welcome Mr. Lamb to
Thank you.
Syria.
I'm very happy to be here in Syria today.
Perhaps you can maybe introduce yourself.
Well, in recent years, the Americans' concern for Middle East peace, which was actually founded in 1982 during the invasion of Lebanon. Some of us spent that whole summer in Lebanon. What we do is advocate for a change in Middle East policy, to be more in tune with the mass of the people of the region and to break this relationship with Israel and the Zionist colony that has so affected our policies. So that's basically our work.
Mr. Lamb, how do you evaluate maybe the so-called peace process in the region at a time when Israeli high-ranking figures are trying to instigate the entire world against Syria, and also the Israeli authorities at the same time stress, maybe for the example, that there will be no freezing for settlements building even for 3 hours?
Yes, yes. Well, my view is quite clear on that subject. I don't think there is a real peace process, and there hasn't been since the sellout of Camp David. What we've seen is buying time while stealing more land, talking and building more settlements, complaining that there's no peace partner, but not being willing or able to be a peace partner themselves. So I think it's a fake process. I think it's been exposed. I think the world now understands that it's been a Zionist project, and the only course for the liberation of Palestine is resistance. And I think we've learned that the hard way over the past 6 decades.
And what about Syria?
Well, I think that in 2000, of course, there was an initiative that came close to settling at least the issue of the Golan Heights, which has got to be settled. Obviously, it belongs to Syria. Zionists don't have a right to 1 grain of that soil. I'm not very optimistic with the current government in Israel that they're serious about that either at this time. But, you know, there are historic changes taking place.
And even they are instigating the whole world against Syria.
Yes, exactly. So that's hardly a serious process. And as you know, that from the statements of their government figures, I think they have no intention willingly to give back that land now. But history is changing, as we're seeing. And I think eventually, of course, the Syrians will regain their land. But I think right now there's no serious effort by Israel to make an agreement with Syria.
Mr. Lamb, in 2007, you were in Nahr al-Bared in northern Lebanon, maybe upon the disturbances in the camp at that time. And you wrote an article, Who is Behind Fighting in the North? Now in Syria, 2001, who is behind the bloody events that are taking place now in 2011?
Well, I think there is an element of some legitimate concern among some people, but I think what has happened, and it's very clear to me, is that the Zionist and American project is to weaken the resistance. Syria is a big problem for the Israelis because of its past. Sometimes there are problems for Americans, sometimes they're not. But when the American administration saw an opportunity to attack the resistance, to break this resistance between Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran in Syria, they upped the ante.
So you're saying that the Americans are behind it?
Yeah, I think there's a prominent role. I think the facts have been clear that they've funded Syrian opposition groups for several years. I say now that they're hoping that it will weaken Syria because that will weaken the resistance. But recently, the last few days, it looks like they're realizing that that's not going to be an easy task, that the government here is strong and they do want stability. So I think they've had a role in that, in encouraging it, but I think that now we've seen perhaps the beginning of the end of that problem, and I think they're preparing to back off because the Obama administration has a lot of other problems right now, and I don't think they want...
You think they're backing off?
In terms of aiding and abetting and encouraging this revolt, because they're realizing what's best for Syria and what's best for the region, and maybe even American interest long-term, is stability. And I think that there is a certain confidence, as John Kerry, the Senate Foreign Foreign Relations Committee chairman said that President Assad is a strong leader, and he, remember Hillary Clinton at one point even referred to him 2 or 3 times as a reformer. Now she seemed, I think they thought there was an opportunity to make a progress. They're seeing that that's not true, so now it seems they're settling down.
This is a question I wanted to ask you about the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that she issued different and sometimes contradictory statements about Syria and the developments it is witnessing. I mean, what is the reason behind that? Why are they different, maybe in a short period of time?
I think the White House and the Pentagon and the State Department are almost under siege with all the developments that's going on. Obviously, the NATO no-fly zone, which is really an American, was a mistake. They're having a hard time justifying the support for Bahrain and Saudi Arabia with what they're doing to their people. So I think a lot of these news cycles that they're human beings, so they make statements that then they have to evaluate and think about. I think it's no more than that. I think actually things have been happening so quickly that you do get a difference of view. But I think basically it's that they've realized that going after Syria may have been a mistake, and I think they're backing off of Syria, and I think in the future they're going to be willing to work with Syria once the security aspect is settled here.
Mr. Lamb, what are today's parameters maybe of the American administration's projects for the region as a whole?
I think it's unchanged, and what it has been in the past 6 decades after the Second World War is 3 elements. They want stability, and they will support a regime that is stable. They will whether or not it's a despotic regime or not. That's not a primary interest. The other pillar is that they want a friendly leader in terms of American bases. You know, we've got over 700 now, and that's the second element. The third is they don't want a regime that becomes an embarrassment, as Mubarak did and as Gaddafi did. And they don't want a regime that challenges Israel. And that's why attacking Syria is attractive, because Syria has a history since 1963.
So how are they trying to implement this with Syria? Maybe you're saying that they want a friendly, maybe, or maybe an ally, and do what they want, more bases in the region, do what they want. So how do you think they are implementing their projects against Syria?
Well, they're not. I don't think they're doing it very well, and there are contradictions. But I think when the current troubles here quiet down and they get back, that they will be willing to return and try to work out their differences. Because of Israel's strategic position, they've allowed, Syria's strategic position, they've allowed Syria to have its resistance, especially in terms of Israel, because it's been a peaceful one. There hasn't been conflict in the Golan since 1974. But the American problem with Syria is the connection with Iran, their friendship with Iran and with Hezbollah. And you know that it's
mainly resistance and defending their own rights, their legitimate rights.
Yes, absolutely.
They don't want to defend their rights. They don't want Syria to defend its rights. That's
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And they want to weaken Iran in any way they can. They see Iran as a rising power, you know, and a competitor for the United States. So Syria is kind of in this middle position. I mean, we've had good relations with the Syrians in the past. I think they want them in the future, but they're aware that if they can squeeze, this is what I think is boiled down to. They saw this street uprising, and they saw an opportunity maybe to go after the Assad government and to give them an ultimatum, as the Pentagon did. Break with Hezbollah, they said. Stop aiding Hezbollah. Well, that's not probably going to happen. But they thought they would try that. So if Syria shows weakness...
Directly, they said it, I mean.
They did indeed. Yeah. And if Syria shows weakness and a lack of resolve, which their history shows that they're not likely to do, they will be resolute. But if there is a weakening of the regime, sure, they'll try to exploit that in some way. And I think that accounts for some of those earlier statements. But I think they reevaluated that. They see the writing on the wall here, and I think they're going to back off of Syria, and when things quiet down, try to re-engage Syria, because Syria is a key with many cards to play in this region, and the Americans need good relations with the Syrian government and the Syrian people.
And that's, we were speaking about the parameters of the American administration's projects, maybe in the region. In that sense, do you think we have a new version, maybe, of the American hegemony schemes we are facing, or are we facing a revised, maybe, version of the do you generally?
I think we're seeing a desperate effort to retain the hegemony, but the Americans have lost several allies that they counted on for decades. You know that. No one can predict the outcome of the so-called Arab and Islamic awakening, and certainly America can't predict that. They want to keep the hegemony. They're not sure how they're going to do it exactly, and I believe that's why this period is very fluid and difficult, and that also accounts for why we see contradictory statements coming out of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the White House. They don't know. But the idea is, of course, to have the hegemony. And they will favor democracy as long as democracy here doesn't mean taking control of the people themselves, of their natural resources, and of their policies. You know, in principle,
democracy
sure.
that serves them.
Well, yes. I mean, we don't mind some democracy as long as it's not too much democracy so that it interferes with our hegemony. I think that's very clear, as Noam Chomsky points out regularly, and I think he's very right about that. We do have American values of human rights, but we also have American interests. And those interests in Bahrain, it's the Fifth Fleet. Those interests, you know, in Mubarak, yeah. And if you have human rights or strategic interests, military, the military is going to, the interests are going to trump the values, I think. And that's what we're seeing in this very interesting period of history.
You referred many times now that the Americans maybe are behind the events here in Syria or something. It is clear for everybody that now in Syria, Syria is fighting not only fanatics and extremists in some of its cities and streets, but also an ethically unprofessional media campaign. What do you think about the media campaign?
Well,
this is another war.
It is another war, and I'd like to give you two examples. I want to say I have no evidence that the Americans have armed these groups or that they've you know, in there on the ground with their agents. It's clear that they funded opposition groups for some time. But you mentioned the other media campaign. Why is the American embassy in Ramallah, right here, issuing these statements for Americans not to come here, for Americans to leave? It's another kind of tactic to weaken the economy, to scare off the tourists during the season. I say to Americans, my fellow Americans, now's a great time to come to Syria. The beautiful green spaces of Damascus, the safety, I can walk around at 2 a.m. in the morning. Try that in any of 350 American cities, and you'll see a big difference.
Yeah,
and
confirming what you're saying, I met some American tourists here in Syria in the middle of the events, and they were just going through the cities, and they were maybe, I interviewed with them, and they spoke what they saw on the ground. Yeah.
Yes, so this is part of that campaign, that American campaign to squeeze the regime here, to pressure the Syrian government into pulling away from support of the resistance of Hezbollah. And if they can do it by frightening off tourists, if they can attack through the Office of Financial Asset Control of the U.S. Treasury Department, they're going after 13 Syrian citizens' bank accounts, putting them as special designated nationals, which is another terrorist list number 8. It's a weak terrorist list, but it's a big campaign. Sure it is, and it's all aimed at the hegemony and keeping the region under as much control of the Americans and their ally Israel as they can. It takes many forms.
And the media campaign, just let me note that it's not only in the West, in the West media.
No.
It's also in the Arab media. I mean, there are a lot of channels, Arab channels, that are trying to instigate, that are trying to give wrong information and trying to put Syria maybe into more of trouble.